Hello and welcome to another episode of StudioTech. Now we've got an old friend, well he's not so old, but somebody who's been on the show a few times before, and that's Richard Payne from Holden here in the UK. Richard, welcome.
Hello, thank you Mark, I'm glad to be back.
It's good to have you here, and you've brought something along that's been a lot of interest, and I mean not just in the sort of studio and video market, but in the photographic world, and that's the Panasonic GH4, though it's probably got a longer name than that.
That's the DMC GH4, to give it its full proper name.
All right, and this is is it described as a DSLR or is it
Not really, no, this is a mirrorless compact camera. And a mirrorless compact camera, there's no real short way of describing it. It means it doesn't, you don't look directly through the viewfinder and see the image with a mirror flipping up when you take the photo, which means it can be lighter weight and faster to react than a standard mirror.
So when you're looking through the eyepiece, then there's an LED or LCD
That's right,
display.
It's OLED. So,
OLED,
so you get
even
rather fantastic blacks and good contrast levels and very fast response. But yes, you're not looking straight through the lens, you're looking at an electronic reference. Right. But of course, when you're shooting video on a DSLR anyway, you're not looking through the lens either.
Because the shutter, the mirror up.
Exactly.
Normally, yeah.
So you have to use the back screen. But the advantage of this camera for video shooting is that you're looking at a very high resolution OLED viewfinder all the time when you're shooting. So even in bright sunlight, you don't need any extra equipment.
So we're going to talk about the camera. Then in a few minutes' time, we're going to look at the accessory that if you wanted to use it in a studio,
that's right.
It allows you to take out the SDI video and things like that.
That's right.
So we're going to do this almost in two parts. Quick look at the camera, and then we'll have a look at it combined with its
the YAGHE, the YAGHE adapter, which we'll go through in some detail.
Right. All right. So the big thing about this camera is that it's 4K.
That's right, yes. And it's a major, it's the first camera of its type which can record 4K internally onto SD card.
Okay, so that's what, class 10 presumably?
It's faster actually. This is SanDisk Extreme Pro, and you need the very latest, very fastest cards to be able to guarantee the recording of it. Certainly the Extreme Pro works, also the new Panasonic UH3 cards.
And at what bit rate is it recording the 4K?
4K is recorded at 100 megabits a second, which is a minute per gig. And this camera can also shoot very high quality HD, and you can record HD at up to 200 megabits a second, which is an all iframe codec. So it's sort of above broadcast data rates.
So iframe means that it's capturing every single frame
individually.
It's not sort of doing any remembering of what was in the last.
Exactly. So very good for capturing fast motion, and it will record 1080 50p or 1080 60p in addition to 4K at 25p or 24p or 30p. So you buy this camera, it doesn't come with a lens, and what type of sensor? Yeah, what type of sensor and what type of lens do you need? It's a micro four thirds camera, so the sensor is micro four thirds. So it's a smaller sensor than a full frame camera like a Canon 5D Mark III, which means there's a crop factor. Right. The lens I have on it here is a lovely one. It's a 12 to 35. With a constant aperture of 2.8, so it's probably about a £700, $1,000 lens.
And the camera?
The camera retails in the UK for £1,300, including VAT.
Right, so that's probably a couple of $1,000s or thereabouts.
That's right, yes.
Elsewhere in the world. I mean, it's quite light. I'm used to a Canon 5D, and it is smaller, more compact.
It is. It's probably about half the weight of the compacts with mirror cameras, and this makes it a huge advantage for obviously taking it everywhere with you, because it takes up half the space and weighs half as much. Also, it has image stabilization built into a lot of the lenses, the Panasonic lenses. So you can get away with shooting this handheld without the need of a huge amount of paraphernalia with it. You don't need a rail system, you don't need follow focus, all these extra, because you're able to use a very high resolution screen to focus, and you have tools like focus peaking and zebras, which you don't traditionally get on this type of camera. So for me, what makes it so exciting is it's the first hybrid camera. This is the first thing I can really trust to get decent video and decent stills out of. So not only can I get my 4K video, I can get 16 megapixel stills, which are as good as certain other cameras which I own.
Okay, so one of the advantages of 4K, not everybody's got a 4K monitor, but there are advantages in shooting in 4K, even if you haven't got a 4K monitor. Right?
If possible, I'll show you some of this later on the timeline in an edit program. But the two main advantages to shooting 4K. One is being able to change your shot afterwards. For instance, 4K is 4 times the resolution of HD. Or when I say 4K, this camera is capable of shooting full 4K, which is 4096 by 2160 pixels. And that's the cinematic 4K. Right. But in order to do that, it has to be at 24 frames a second, which isn't so good for playing back on PAL TVs or NTSC TVs. It's good to shoot at this format, but only if you're intending to have your film processed and sent out to a cinema screen, or maybe Vimeo or maybe YouTube, because they really are frame rate independent. But in 25 frames a second, you're shooting Ultra HD, UHD, which is 3840 by 2160 pixels.
Right.
And I can't remember how I got into that.
No, but how you've got lots of data. So then you can basically
you've got four times.
Yeah,
so you've got 4 times HD. So 4 times. So if you imagine the screen just split into 4, each segment is a HD program. So I could shoot this interview, but I could choose a close-up of you, take that top corner and have a large close-up of you head and shoulders. That would be one quarter of the screen. Me would be another quarter. Close-up of the camera down there.
You could just take out
that's right.
that bit.
So I could reframe it, just like when you crop a high-resolution still image, but I can do this with moving video without losing resolution. And you really wouldn't be able to tell I've done this if you're watching in HD. And this would also allow me to do a pan between us, because electronically we could create a smooth pan from one to the other. And so you can shoot a wide landscape, but then you can, in post-production, choose to turn that into a pan, into a tilt, into 3 or 4 different shots. You know, big advantage, especially if you're a one-man shooter shooting an interview, you're able to shoot your cutaways at the same time as your main shot. And 4K cameras have been used like this for quite some time. I remember I went to the RSPB film unit and they were using a red camera for just this, so they could shoot an interview with one camera and in post-production decide how to cut it. So that's one advantage. The other advantage, and this for me as a quality junkie is probably more important, if you're shooting 4K like this camera does and it's compressing it onto the card, in order to get 4K onto a SD card at a minute per gigabyte, you're having to compress it quite heavily. And it has to use 4:0 processing, and it has to be 8 bits. So there's not as much detail in the color gradation. It's not as subtle, and there's not as much detail in the gradation between black and white as well if it's 4:0. However, if you then compress this on your timeline in your editing program and you take your 4K footage, you place it on an HD timeline, then your 420 8-bit footage becomes 444 10-bit. It becomes like a cinema camera output.
444 or 442?
444.
Oh, wow.
444 10-bit. There's a lot more color because you're compressing the color resolution and the luminance resolution together. So effectively, you're magically in getting the best possible HD, even though you're only shooting at 100 megabits.
Which is great for colours, but it's also great if you're chroma keying and stuff like
right.
that, being able to get the exact green.
Because normally, in order for a camera to not create aliases, sort of false detail in a picture, which can be very confusing for keying or anything like this, you have to use something like a low-pass filter, so it rolls off the high-frequency detail. The very fine detail is always lost in that image. But if you shoot with 4K and then you use your editing software to get rid of this very high frequency detail, you get absolutely every line of your 1920 by 1080. You get every piece of detail which it's physically possible to resolve with the lens and sensor. So you get much sharper picture. The picture has got much more detail and it jumps out at you if you have an image like a landscape. You know, there's some wonderful footage available online. If you do a search of GH4 New Zealand, you'll see some amazing drone footage which just shows how the sharpness in the trees, even though you might be playing it back HD, this original 4K resolution comes back to give you incredible crisp detail, which is gorgeous to look at.
And hopefully we'll see that later when we've connected it up and we can get an output into our system, then we'll look at some pictures.
Yeah.
So, sounds like a great camera. I know it's been incredibly popular at a good price point.
That's right.
So let's now move on to I call it a docking station. Not sure if that's the right.
I think it's probably calling it a docking station is a lot better than calling it a YAGHE unit. But that's the YAGHE, as I call it, to give it a bit of personality, is a slightly ungainly thing. It looks like a large battery grip, but in reality, particularly for studio use, this is where the camera comes into its own, because the camera is available, obviously, a very lightweight unit to shoot for taking out, for doing work in the field. And one of the big advantages of having a small form factor like this, people think you're just taking stills. And I've shot video on Westminster Bridge in areas where you'd never be allowed to shoot without permits, and you can just immediately take it out, start snapping it away. And as far as anyone's concerned, you're taking stills of Big Ben, but actually you're getting lovely crowd shots of masses of people crossing the bridge. But in a studio situation, having such a small form factor isn't so useful. For instance, you'll be relying on battery power. Now, although this battery lasts about 6 hours of shooting, which is fantastic, it's still, if you're in a studio, you want some mains power for this unit, and there's no way of powering mains without using the YAGHE unit. So if I put the camera on,
if we look at just have a quick look at the front view of the unit first.
So yes, this is the YAGHE unit, the YAGHE, is the docking station which suddenly gives this camera broadcast credentials. For a start, we have a full-size HDMI output here. Without it, the camera only has a micro HDMI, and we actually use this to connect the full-size HDMI here, but it's on a rail system and it screws into the
very firmly.
Exactly. So it makes the whole thing very robust. Whereas a micro HDMI on its own, if you blow on it, you can knock it out. Also, on the other side, this is where the thing gets really interesting. We have
lots of connectors.
4 SDI, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is called quad SDI, and a timecode input as well. Now, each one of these SDI connectors takes a quarter of the picture, as we said.
Of a 4K picture.
Exactly.
Quarter of a 4K.
And so each one is top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right through each one of these. So you can use 4 low-cost connectors, and you can put it through your traditional routing system. So you don't need to buy a 4K router. You can just use your HD
on these. Sorry, 4. Can you actually get HD out of these? So if you want, okay.
If you in a menu setting select the HD out instead of the down convert out, you can shoot 4K on the camera, but get 25p HD through all of these condensers. You can also, if you have the camera in HD mode, shoot 50p, so you can get 1080 50p or 60p through 3 gigabit SDI.
Right.
And it does Type A and Type B 3 gigabit SDI. So we've got timecode in for matching timecode from multiple cameras, and we've got XLR audio in here. There's a DC input. Now this unit must be powered by DC. Okay. There's no battery power for this unit, which in the field is a disadvantage. It means you might need to invest in a V-lock or some decent power system. But in a studio, it means the thing will run 24/7 off a standard 4-pin XLR power supply.
For those who are used to it, there's a lot of studio cameras use that 4-pin connection, and we have it on one of our cameras. So.
And then on the back, you've got the audio functionality laid bare here. We've got line and mic level inputs, stereo or mono, and we've also got phantom power. And here's the audio levels, very traditional sort of feel for anybody who's used to a modern video camera.
Meters as well.
And audio meters, that's right. So it's very clear. So what makes the YAGHE very important for audio purists is the audio is of very high quality, and it's injected straight into the motherboard of the camera. With other systems like a BeachTech box, for instance, you've got audio that the final path is through a 3.5 unbalanced mini jack into the side of the camera. But with this, digital audio goes straight into the codecs, is encoded like it would be in any full professional video camera, so you get very high quality audio. So this box gives us studio functionality.
That's great. So let's have a look at the camera connected to it.
Okay, so there's a couple of little tricks you might need to know. There's some pins here which register with holes on the bottom of the camera, and as you can see, you have to remove a couple of rubber units because the body is weather sealed. You can use this in
what does
light
light rain?
Weather sealed is light rain. Yes,
right.
So you could certainly use it in sea spray, so if you were on a boat you wouldn't have to worry too much. You could not dunk it in the Pacific, but you could You could certainly use it in drizzle, light rain, and take it out, do a few shots without worrying about it. There are registration points here. There's these two posts which go into the bottom of the camera, and then there's a thumb wheel on the back which screws it down tight. So it doesn't matter if you have a battery for the camera or not, but because the camera draws power from the YAGHE unit when it's connected. So you can feel when the camera is on properly, and then screw using the thumb wheel, and it makes a very secure bond between the camera and the YAGHE. It feels like it's all hewn from one solid block when you've got it connected properly. Then, this is a little bit of a fiddly bit, you pull out the rubber connector cover, but keep it at 90 degrees because there's a little recess in this unit here which mounts the micro HDMI cable, and that recess fits that perfectly. And then in we go with the micro HDMI, and there's a little thumb wheel on the side
just to screw it up
to make it 100% solid. And now the whole unit is as one. Once this is connected, and once you have your 12-volt power supply connected via 4-pin, we can start the camera, and we can see, we know it's connected, there's a green light, and you can see the audio levels moving when we give it an audio input. At the moment, it's taking the audio input from the inbuilt camera microphone.
So is that stereo or mono?
It's stereo. There's a couple of little microphones.
As good as they can be on the...
It's actually surprisingly good considering it's such a tiny microphone on the camera. I've certainly got away with using it when I haven't had anything else handy, but obviously proper XLR power
we didn't look at the bottom. I presume it's got standard tripod mount.
Exactly.
So it's got the 1/4 and the 3/8 or...
Exactly, standard tripod mounting. And also notice there's a couple of useful threads here which are directly in line with the lens. So we could use a matte box without having to invest in an expensive rail system.
So you can use it, okay.
Yep.
All right, so let's plug an SDI cable into the side. And what we're going to do, obviously we don't shoot in 4K yet, so we're going to down convert the output from within the camera to HD.
That's right.
And then we can have a look at some of the menus.
In order to show the menu system through your TriCaster, I've changed us to AVC HD mode because that gives us a 50i output through the SDI connector. So now you're able to see the menu system here. And also you can see the green line, which is a horizon. That's right. And you see we've also got vertical inclination as well. This is wonderful for setting our levels perfectly. So if it's green, you know it's perfect. That's 100% straight, and now we're tilting up, and now we're tilting down. This is a lovely little instant guide, especially so you don't get wonky lakes for water skiing on. So,
it reminds me, I took some fantastic pictures at the weekend, but I was holding the camera at a funny angle, and they're all a bit skewy.
I'd like to say I've never done that, but I've done an awful lot. So. First of all, let's have a look at these photo styles, because this is something you may well change on your DSLR, but on your video, these are, as well as the standard still picture looks, you've got the Cine D and Cine V, which are the Panasonic's Cine V and Cine D are common throughout their camera range for giving you a film-like look with Cine D. Which you can grade later. So this gives you the widest, a sort of flat image with wide dynamic range, which you can pull more detail from your shadows and your highlights later.
And can you tweak these?
Oh, totally. Okay. Yes, if I come into this, I can go to the contrast, I can adjust the sharpness and the noise reduction, and every element of this I can tweak and save it as well. So also, by the way, the back screen is a touch screen, so you can either use it through the menu wheel or I can use the touch screen. So if I go back, if I was shooting and I didn't want to do any post-production, I might choose this Cine V image, which has created a sort of nice black, a sort of clean black look straight out of the camera. It's crushed my shadows a little bit. It's a filmic look. And so you're able to, again, set that up exactly how you like it. That's a personal preference, but rule of thumb is if you're going to grade it, if you don't mind grading it to get a bit more range out of the camera, use Cine D. If you want to use the footage without any tweaking in post-production, use Cine V. Personally, I've set up the natural look because I like the look of the colours in that, and it's exactly what it sounds like, a very naturalistic setting. So record format, as I said, I've set it to AVC HD just to get our 50i output. It's very useful to have a camera which gives a 50i output. Not many stills cameras are capable of doing that. Exposure mode is manual, because with this I can use the back wheel on the camera for, if I just come out of that, out of my menu, I can use the back wheel for shutter speed, which I pretty much lock down to 50th of a second for almost all my shooting.
And we can see that at the bottom left on the display, I think, as you change.
And I can adjust my aperture with the wheel right next to the shutter release. And because this is 2.8, we can open it up to 2.8, and we can shut it down to whatever. And when I shot some stuff at the Grand Canyon, I was literally using everything at about f/22, which is not a good idea. You're much, much better to use a variable neutral density filter. But obviously in studio, you're in much more control over your lighting source.
So this was that's the aperture, the one
aperture
you're
at the front,
changing there.
shutter at the back.
Just at the back, okay.
And we've got traditional things like ISO setting here. If I adjust the ISO here, we can go for bright conditions 200 up to 6400 for coal mines. But you should probably be set on the mid ISO of about 800. If you are shooting in very bright conditions, you really must think about a variable neutral density filter in front of the lens, because you don't want to be shutting right down to f/22, f/11. That's not where a lens looks its best. So use ISO down to 200 first of all, but then neutral density, so you can use f5, f7, more useful mid-ranges like that. So that's on ISO. The white balance here is very comprehensive, as well as our sort of standard settings for tungsten, daylight, or auto white balance. We've got some rather clever presets as well, which you can obviously do a manual white balance too. Or this setting here, which will let me adjust a very variable white balance, and then we can trim this to make it very accurate. So if I adjust this, you see we've got a very, very subtle control over our white balance.
And you're adjusting that, people can't see, but you're adjusting the...
by using my finger on the back of the screen.
Yeah,
that's
the screen
right.
is touch.
So we're able to do a lot with white balance. This is very useful. So if you can't quite get the look you're aiming for, or can't quite get the colours right, that fully manual white balance will definitely give you exactly what you're looking for. I'm going to be chicken and go back for auto white here. And finally, there is an exposure compensation as well, but we won't need to use that because we can just use it on manual to adjust our shutter and our iris. Right, so back to the menus. So autofocus on this camera is exceptionally good. Panasonic are using a new system called depth to defocus, which basically, as long as you're using a Panasonic Lumix lens, it knows how blurry the image is. And as a result, it makes a judgment call on how far away the image is. So for instance, it will say, that's so out of focus, that's so blurry, and at those lens settings it must be 70 meters away. And then it uses a contrast detection for the last bit. This means the autofocus is much, much faster than any other camera on the market currently. So you can use autofocus in a variety of situations. It's always dangerous to use it in video mode, but of any camera's autofocus, you can trust this. And there's a continuous autofocus, so the focus will continue changing while you're recording. And if we go into these autofocus settings, if I just have to do an autofocus, we've got face and eye detection, so it won't just pick up on human faces, it will actually look for an eye, and you can select by touching the back screen the left or the right eye. So there's focus tracking to select an area. You could select an object. I've done this before with my dog in the back garden, and it will move as the object moves backwards and forwards. It will let you move that. There's a standard autofocus which is using 49 areas, so very comprehensive, and you can select to the left or right those areas. Or my favourite is this custom multi-area select, where you can select your own pixels or your own areas like this. So if you had a pillar running throughout the middle of the picture, you choose the left or the right and not the centre. Or you can For instance, if you have people sitting in an audience of a play in front, you could select the autofocus to ignore those.
So it would ignore everything, in this case,
Anything
everything
below,
everything that wasn't yellow.
Only worry, exactly, and worry about the focus in the area above. So a very powerful feature.
That's good, I like that.
And a one area autofocus lets us do the traditional where you can just select a particular object, and we can adjust the size of this as well, and do a touch autofocus, so we can come from the box.
Things have changed over the years on this, on autofocus, haven't they?
They have. Although, as I say, I would never trust it in a production situation, because the camera's dumb. It doesn't know what it's meant to be focusing on. You do. So in the manual focus, you immediately get this punch in and this ability to be very short, especially with, you see the blue area, that's the focus peaking, which is showing us exactly what is in sharp focus. And we can just come out of that like so. So back into the menus, and we have this lovely thing here called highlight and shadow. And this works in conjunction with those picture profiles to let us adjust the curve of the shadows and the highlights. And can you see we're putting a bit more detail into the shadows, and we can crush our highlights a little so we get a bit more detail outside the window. This is of course quite an extreme situation with daylight outside, but you see by crushing our highlights we can get the most possible dynamic range out of the camera, and by bringing up our shadows we increase dynamic range. And what I mean by dynamic range is being able to see into the highlights and the shadows simultaneously. So that gives us a huge range on the camera, and also a large creative potential, because you might want to crush away your shadows so you get that lovely black filmic look, or get rid of noise if you're filming in a very low light situation. So that's the highlight and shadow. These automatic iDynamic will adjust the dynamic range dependent on the picture, but again, like autofocus, it's something you trust your own eyes rather than the camera's brain. As brilliant as the quad processor in this is, it's not as good as your brain at judging what image looks good. So if you use iDynamic, intelligent dynamic range, or the intelligent resolution here, you may introduce noise or problems which much better to do it by eye. The master pedestal allows us to set a sort of pivot point for the camera, at which point the camera starts seeing a clean black. And as you can see, just like adjusting the highlights and shadows, we can pull more detail out of our blacks or crush that detail in our blacks away. This is a great thing which is normally in studio cameras for matching different cameras together. So it sets the black point for the camera. Luminance levels here, this allows us to select a crushed luminance level. 16 to 235 is safe for broadcast levels.
For TVs, basically.
That's right, because white is never the full range of up to 255. 0 to 255 would give you 0 as black and 255 as white. It's more a sort of a dark grey, 16 to 255 to a very light grey. You can. I quite often use this 16 to 255, which will give me more information in my highlights, but you must know to deal with that in post-production. But it can get you a little more detail in the clouds in the sky, which you might find useful in post-production to bring back. Synchro scan, this is a fantastic thing which is mainly on higher end video cameras, which allows me to very accurately fine-tune my shutter to get rid of effects like...
So if you were filming in the US, at 60 hertz with their lights or something,
but you wanted to shoot at 50 frames a second.
You can adjust it
for the UK. You can adjust to get rid of the strobing bars you see down.
I know it well.
And that sort of problem with particular with fluorescent lighting or sodium lighting, you can use this to get rid of. Also, if you're shooting an old CRT, say you're shooting a drama and you've got an old CRT in the corner, they do still exist. You're able to dial out the screen strobing that you'll get on those by using synchro scan. And so don't forget to turn that off. We'll also come into digital zoom we're never going to use, but time code. The camera, if you're using the YAGHE, has a time code input on a BNC, and we can
sync to that.
We can sync to it, yes, or we can put it on free run, and we can enter values, time of date, just full control over our time code input, which is fantastic to have on a camera like this. Very, very useful for multi-camera shoots. The HDMI output, I'm changing here, but this will also change the SDI output, and we can change between 8-bit and 10-bit mode. Now, as you can see, if you have your HDMI and SDI set to 10-bit recording, so get that more subtlety of luminance and colour through the SDI or the HDMI terminal, you can't record internally at the same time.
The processor's doing too much, handling everything else.
Exactly. So do be aware, if you set it to 10-bit like this, two things happen. One is your menu disappears from the screen.
Right.
And two, you won't be able to internal record. So we'll go back to 8-bit for now because we're not worried about the ultimate quality through this. 4K down convert, this is very useful because it allows us to be shooting 4K but to output standard HD through the HDMI for monitoring. Because there isn't currently an EVF or a little 4K monitor you can buy. I'm sure they'll come soon. Silent operation, this is great for shooting stills. It's a totally silent operation for using an electronic shutter, so you don't hear anything as you press the shutter. So great if you're filming when somebody's about to take the putt for a major golf tournament, or if you just want to shoot covertly and don't want people to know when you're firing off the shutter for street photography. Very useful. These microphone settings allow you to adjust the sound if you're not using a YAGHE. If you've got a YAGHE, remember we've got volume levels
on the
thumb
back,
wheels on the back
of the
of
unit.
it.
Yeah.
That's right. And then we've got mic limiter, very useful if you don't want to worry too much about the sound, although it's better to do it manually. Wind cutoff. And finally down here we can select filmic people can use angle and ISO for their shutter speed and sensitivity. Halfway house people like me can choose seconds for shutter speed and ISO for sensitivity, or old cameramen can choose seconds and dB for how it's just how it displays the shutter and displays the sensitivity. So dB, 0 dB would be 800 ISO. So I'm going to go back to seconds and ISO. We can output full colour bars. There's SMPTE and EBU colour bars, which will let us check systems. You know, we should have done this when we were having our problems initially to connect the whole thing. It would have been very smart. So you could see what we were doing. And then the interface unit, if you've got the YAGHE connected, it allows us to select audio between the XLR inputs and the built-in
camera body. Yeah.
Right, that's right. The SDI remote recording, so we could trigger something like an Atomos Ninja remotely by pressing record on here would trigger that. Especially useful if you're recording in 10-bit mode, because remember it doesn't record internally. The LED brightness, if you're in a dark studio, you can just change it to change the level of these LED meters here.
Right, let's have a look at the on camera 4.
Yeah. So these LED meters can be brighter, but obviously that might be annoying in a studio situation. And then the 3 gig SDI type. Some equipment prefers level B, which is progressive over interlace, which is a way of doing 50p over SDI, which is 3 gigabit SDI. For instance, the Blackmagic wanted us to switch to level B in order to show the image properly on the monitors. Level A, some other equipment prefers level A. It just gives you the choice. So basically, if you're not getting a picture through SDI, 3 gigabit SDI change from level A to level B or vice versa. And finally, this one's caught me out before, this is low battery alert, and it basically tells the box, if you're using it on battery power, when to shut down when the battery's got to too low a point, or it will give you a warning that the battery's losing power.
So this is the one you told me you don't want to adjust.
That's right. Yeah, I've leave it on 11 volts because if I adjust it to any other voltage using this particular power supply, which is obviously a bit
probably
lower,
12 volts
yeah, it's
or
probably
something.
12 volts. What happens is it turns off my YAGHE and then I forget to turn it back on again. So leave that on 11 volts, folks. Yeah. It's much safer.
Well, it's a 12 volt power supply, and you switch it to 12.5, and it says, "Oh, I've already missed my alarm point.
That's right.
And I must power down.
Yes, emergency."
So there's a lot there to learn. I mean, you've had this camera for a few months. I mean, did you find it intuitive or?
Yes and no. To be honest, I'm much more used to traditional cameras, and now I'm finding it intuitive after 3 months. And there are things in the menu settings which I've changed, and I've had to go and zero the menu to back to factory default because I've been doing a demonstration like this and I fiddled with something and I've forgotten what I've done, and suddenly I can't get my full range of ISOs or something's changed. So there is, with a full-size video camera, there's a lot more room on it for extra buttons, for extra, there's a logic to where your iris is. It's on the lens where these things are.
And manually assigning buttons and all that stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, you can manually assign some of these function buttons, but to be honest, it's a dangerous game, and you'll probably end up going back to reset the menu. A lot of thought has gone into design. Well, what is useful is to be able to use the touchscreen on the back. Because it's a touchscreen, it's more intuitive. And also, have a look at this. If you noticed, this is a setting.
So let's have a look at it.
So if you look at the
can we tilt it and look at it from above,
actually,
maybe?
Or if you switch to...
It won't go all the way around. So there we go.
There we go. So can you see across the top, whenever you're on a setting...
It gives you some help information.
It tells you
almost.
what the setting is. Sorry, so if we come back out of that, so back into our menu, up here, we've got a scrolling title which says what that button does. So actually, without the manual, if you turn that setting on, and it is a setting in itself to give you menu information, you can find out what this stuff does.
Just to focus automatically when...
That's right.
Yeah.
Wi-Fi, it stands to reason. I'll come back to the Wi-Fi on this camera in a minute. So it will tell you what every setting is, and there are 4 different sets of menus, but as you can see, there are 6 menus in the first page. There are 9 in the sort of configuration pages. There's a lot to learn with this camera, but if you turn that menu information on,
it really will help.
It will help you do it without the manual, for all us men who never look at manuals.
So we've been through a lot of the options. Are there any others you want to show, or can we look at some output?
I think we ought to. One thing which I would like to talk about is that Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi connectability, because there's a free app from Panasonic for Android and for iOS devices to let us totally remote control the camera and see the image from the camera remotely while we're shooting, which is fantastic for one-man studios. You're able to change focus and iris and many of the menu settings just from your iPhone or your iPad. So shall we show that?
Let's have a look, yeah.
If I press the function 1 button on top of it, let's just come out of the menu, and that will enable the Wi-Fi on the camera. Now, if you haven't connected your camera before, it will show you a QR code which you can use to scan on your phone, so you don't have to worry about putting in very long passcodes or SSIDs. If
you've connected before.
If you have connected it before, what should happen, although with Wi-Fi it's a bit like working with children and animals.
So is this an ad hoc? It's just between your phone,
right.
So you're not going through any routers.
We could log this on, and we'd have better, stronger signal if we logged it onto your router in the building. But if you just do an ad hoc, we'll get about 4 or 5 meters out of it. And you see it's picking up on the GH4 Wi-Fi signal here.
Yeah, if we move this over to the right little and then go to the overhead camera, we can probably see that.
So we're on the GH4 Wi-Fi here, and we'll just come through to the image app. Now, the camera screen has now said under remote control, and now we are getting the image from the camera live on my app.
On the app, right? Wow.
So we can adjust the autofocus area like this. We can also adjust focus manually. If we have a zoom lens, we can adjust. See, I'm using manual focus here, and even the peaking
see
comes
the peaking
through.
On it, yeah.
And zoom back out again. And if we have a servo zoom lens, you can even zoom on the remote application. So we can also go into our menus on our cameras. There's our quick menus, and choose different settings. So that's Cine D, Cine V, we can control from here. And we can go into the details of those and adjust those.
You can adjust them.
Huge. Wow. So you've got full CCU control.
A lot of these apps are very limited. I mean, basically it's sort of focus, zoom and record.
That's right.
But this is a lot more than that.
It gives us, we can go into the quality it's recording even. So a huge amount of control over our camera using this app. And it's a free app, obviously. And we can even go to playback, and we can switch our camera to playback mode and playback video and still images over the Wi-Fi connector. But most of the time I'm using it for, let's just have a go at that. So if we just So this is actually a 4K image. It says, depending on your smartphone, it may not be able to do it. It will do a down convert. There we are. I'm playing a 4K image from the camera.
And audio, I can hear.
With audio over this app.
Wow. So if we want to look at some of the video that we've shot on the viewfinder, Richard, we can do it easily
Oh
on here,
yes, I can play 4K, or I can play 4K shots back at HD as well, down convert on playback. Or, as we saw, I could even play it over Wi-Fi on my iPad or iPhone or Android device. If I just press the play button here, we can, straight up at this image I took on Westminster Bridge, and I can just play it by pressing play here, and we can adjust the volume live as well. And this is a sort of shot where, when you're shooting with a small camera like this, I think the people thought I was just taking a shot of Big Ben, but
a still photo, yeah.
That's right. And in reality, I'm taking
so this is
a nice little
handheld?
moving shot, handheld, using the image stabilization. But I can punch into this with all that added resolution. I can do a very, very static shot, as if it was on a tripod, in a place where I know for a fact you are not allowed to shoot normally. So it's very useful for covert shooting, or shooting in environments, you know, where you know these days you're going to get stopped for causing obstruction.
And if you wanted to move forward and backwards, or to your photos, how do you identify your photo? These are videos.
In exactly the same way. If you just scroll through the videos, and you can tell it to just go through the photos afterwards. So if I keep going back, in fact, go forwards through these, I think there's a bunch of still images afterwards. You can rotate the wheel to go forwards, and we'll get to a bunch of stills in a minute. So these are all 4K videos, but on the back screen it's equally happy to play back. Let's keep going. That was, if it says it can't be played, it's recorded at a different time base. So these are still images. There's my watch there, my sunglasses, my daughter's eye, and this is a video of my watch taken with a macro lens, which hopefully you'll be able to show full screen.
That's great. It's a very impressive camera, and I think the YAGHE, they need a better name, don't they?
They do, definitely. Yes, let's
the
call it
the GH4 docking station.
Let's call it the Quad SDI docking station. Yeah.
Works really well. And so we just looked at this scene full screen, but we've now got it loaded into something on your laptop.
That's right. I'm using Grass Valley Edius software, which is particularly good at handling 4K footage, and I've put it on my timeline here in Edius, and I've dragged an image stabilization filter from my filters onto it, and this will let me, even though shot handheld without a camera, I can play it back, and it will give me, it doesn't play back particularly well because my laptop's about 3 years old, and you do need up-to-date hardware for playing 4K footage. But I could process this down to HD with no problem at all, and then it would play. And as you can see, we're getting a stable shot on Westminster Bridge, as if I shot it with a tripod, although I was just standing there with...
It was pretty stable anyway, but that makes it even better.
Makes it rock solid, that's right. So
now, you mentioned earlier that, of course, the other thing you can do with 4K is that you can zoom in and you can do a pan.
That's right.
I think you're going to show us that.
I've got a shot here which I took in the South Downs, just above where I live, and I'll just get it to the point. So what I've done with this is a static locked-off landscape shot with my GH4, which I can play back. I'm going to double-click to play it full screen, just so you can see it better. And you can see it's video because the grass is moving. Now the aliasing, because we're looking at the software overlay, that's why there's a twinkling on the buildings. This would be perfect if it was a native video out. And I'll give you the file so you can try this for yourself with Final Cut. But if I play this back, you see this zoom did not happen in camera. This is a zoom done in post-production, and then this pan across the image again is fully done in post-production. It's not part of the shot.
And this is all HD. This is an HD.
That's right. Yes, this is. So because as long as we don't zoom in more than a quarter of the screen, more than 25% of the screen, we're able to keep full HD quality throughout the whole process. So you're able to turn one static camera shot into a variety of shots, pans, tilts, close-ups, whatever you like. It's me driving the car down the road. I think that's the point where we'll pull out of that before you see me doing something illegal.
No, surely not.
So the huge advantage of 4K is the ability to reframe, recrop, to change your mind after shooting, but also by resizing it on an HD timeline, you're improving the quality and increasing the color resolution to give you that amazing 444 10-bit, which of course cinema camera users are so fond of.
So this is Edius from Grass Valley. I mean, just if people are interested in this, how much is this?
There's a special version through the specialist Edius reseller network. You can get this for as little as £250, but the standard retail is about £400. Right. And Edius has this lovely feature that it can, you just pop the card in from the camera and immediately see all the video and stills, and even raw stills you can use immediately. You can drag the still straight onto the timeline in Edius and use them, or you can work with the video. So very, very useful for 4K editing.
Well, thanks for showing us that as well. Now, I think some people would back off saying, well, I don't, it's a bit clumsy for studio use. But I guess the real selling point is if you want something you can take out.
I think
and it almost acts as an additional option for the studio.
You mustn't forget what this is doing is it's giving you 16 megapixels, very high quality stills, professional level photographs at the same time as 4K video, HD video, high frame rate. We haven't even mentioned that it does 96 frames a second slow-mo. So if you're analysing a golf swing or your tennis shot, as I've personally done, and find out how bad my serve is, you're able to slow motion down to about a quarter speed and see things very clearly. All of this in a unit that's costing about £2,500, including that with the SDI output. So it's, if you think of it, it's 3 cameras. It's a field video camera, a field stills camera, and a studio camera. But obviously, you don't need to buy 3 separate cameras. But of course, do think about lenses. This Panasonic Lumix 12 to 35 millimeter lens is a peach on it because of the crop factors. It gives you the equivalent of about a 24 to 70, so useful for a small studio.
Range, yeah.
That's right.
Well, as always, Richard, it's been great having you here, and thanks for taking us through the GH4.
No problem. Nice to see you.